Bruna always carried a softness about her, the kind that made people breathe easier just by standing near her. Friends said she moved through life like a quiet breeze, steady and warm, leaving calm wherever she went. Even strangers seemed to trust her instinctively, drawn to her gentle smile and the way she listened as if every word mattered. And maybe that tenderness came from the years she spent learning to care more than she complained. But what most people didn't know was how deeply she held her emotions, how quietly her heart worked to keep the peace. A peace that soon enough would start to tremble under shadows no one saw coming. Bianca, her identical twin, shared every feature except the softness. She walked like someone who had spent her whole life competing with ghosts no one else could see. Where Bruna inspired comfort, Bianca stirred unease, and she felt that difference like a wound that never healed. She watched her sister be adored while she herself fought for scraps of attention, and resentment curled inside her like smoke. In her mind, life was a game of fairness she had never been allowed to win, and each time someone praised Bruna, another thread of jealousy tugged tighter, tight enough that even family ties began to feel like chains she needed to break. Then there was Carlos, calm and earnest, the kind of man who believed love was simple as long as two hearts stayed honest. He adored Bruna with a sincerity that softened every edge of her quiet world. Though he had met Bianca only a handful of times, he never sensed the sharpness behind her eyes, the calculating tilt of her smile. To him, twins were twins. Same face, same voice. Nothing more complicated than that. And maybe that innocence was exactly what placed him in the center of a storm he never saw forming. Because while he loved Bruna deeply, Bianca watched him with a hunger that grew stronger each day. A hunger aimed at everything Bruna had. And that desire was about to twist their lives into a path none of them expected, leading into a darkness that was already waiting at the door. People often said the twins were mirrors. Same hair, same eyes, same features carved with uncanny precision. But anyone who spent more than a moment with them sensed the difference pulsing beneath the surface. Bruna's presence felt like a warm kitchen on a rainy morning, familiar and comforting, while Bianca's energy carried the sharp chill of a door slightly open on a winter night. Those contrasts had followed them since childhood, shaping how the world responded to each of them. And whether Bruna realized it or not, every kindness she received deepened the quiet storm spinning inside her sister, a storm that only needed the right spark to break loose. Carlos, for his part, never imagined that loving Bruna placed him on unpredictable ground. He trusted her deeply, drawn to the quiet resilience that marked her every choice. Sometimes, when she talked about her dreams, he caught glimpses of the little girl she used to be, hopeful, thoughtful, always trying to make everyone else feel safe. But Bianca watched those tender moments like an outsider pressing her face against glass, seeing a life she believed should have been hers. That envy wasn't sudden, it had been simmering for years, shaped by comparisons she never asked for but could never escape. And every time Bruna smiled, Bianca felt another reminder of everything she had lost, or believed she deserved. In Bianca's mind, the universe owed her balance. She had spent too long living in the shadow of someone who never even tried to outshine her. And now, watching Carlos move gently around Bruna, seeing the way his eyes softened at the mention of her name, something inside Bianca snapped into dangerous clarity. It wasn't just jealousy anymore, it was obsession, a determination to take what was never hers while convincing herself it always should have been. And with each passing day, her plan began forming in the quiet corners of her mind, shaping itself into something bold, reckless, and terrifyingly precise, preparing the ground for a deception that would soon blur every line between truth and betrayal in ways none of them could predict. As the days rolled on, Bruna stayed blissfully unaware of the storm forming just behind her reflection. She moved through her routines with her usual softness, never suspecting the weight of her sister's gaze tracing every gesture, every tone of voice, every subtle habit that made her unmistakably herself. Bruna always believed in second chances, in the goodness tucked somewhere inside everyone, but she didn't know that some hearts, especially ones bruised for too long, twist that belief into an advantage. And the person she loved the most would soon become the target of a deception she never imagined possible, a deception that grew stronger with every breath Bianca took. Bianca watched her sister like a strategist studying a map, memorizing the landscape until every path felt familiar under her feet. She observed the way Bruna tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, The slow rise of her shoulders when she was holding back tears, the small, hopeful tilt in her voice when she talked about the future with Carlos. All of it became pieces of a puzzle she planned to fit perfectly over her own skin, and with each detail she mastered, she felt her resentment evolve into a Carlos remained blissfully unaware of the delicate line he was walking, a line becoming thinner by the day. To him, life was stable, predictable, built on trust and the comfort of loving someone who made him feel seen in ways he'd never experienced before. He had no idea that someone else watched him with the same intensity he reserved for Bruna, no idea that every laugh, every hug, every gentle moment he shared with his girlfriend was being studied and coveted by someone wearing the same face. And while he continued believing his world was safe, Bianca quietly prepared to rearrange its pieces. A silent shift that would change everything once she decided it was time to act. Bianca's plan began quietly, like a whisper slipping through a locked room. She spent hours studying her sister with the precision of someone preparing for a role that demanded flawless execution. She mimicked Bruna's soft way of greeting people, practiced the gentle tilt of her voice, even memorized the rhythm of her footsteps. To anyone else, it would have seemed obsessive, but to Bianca, it felt like destiny finally aligning. Every detail she mastered gave her a rush of control she had never tasted before, a feeling that the life she envied was suddenly within reach. And in her mind, this wasn't betrayal, it was justice. Bruna, completely unaware of the storm tightening around her, kept living with the same trusting heart that made her so beloved. She didn't notice Bianca watching her reflection in the mirror longer than usual, or the way her sister repeated her phrases under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Bruna always believed family was a safe place, a foundation that held even during the worst storms, but her kindness made her blind to the cracks forming just behind her, cracks that carried the weight of jealousy, resentment, and a longing Bianca couldn't control anymore. And as those cracks spread, they opened the door for the first step into deception. Carlos remained blissfully unaware of the transformation happening behind his back. Every day, he carried the comfort of loving someone he believed he knew better than anyone. But had he been more attentive, he might have noticed tiny shifts, moments where Bruna seemed oddly distant, or strangely bold, or uncharacteristically cold, moments that felt off but passed quickly enough that he chalked them up to stress or tiredness. He never imagined that another person wearing the same face could slip into his world without him noticing. And while he went on with his ordinary days, Bianca was preparing for the night when she would take her first bold step into Bruna's life, one that would begin unraveling everything they knew. Bianca's preparation became almost ritualistic. She slipped into Bruna's clothes when no one was home, letting the fabric settle over her body as if she were stepping into a second skin. She practiced Bruna's soft laugh, the way her eyes warmed when she smiled, even the tender hesitations she used when speaking to Carlos. Each imitation gave her a twisted thrill, a sense of power she had never felt before. And with every successful mimic, she convinced herself she wasn't stealing a life, she was reclaiming the one she should have had. The more she rehearsed, the more intoxicating the idea became, fueling a determination that left no room for doubt. Meanwhile, Bruna noticed nothing out of place. She moved through her days believing her world was safe, wrapped in the comfort of routine and the warmth of Carlos's quiet affection. She had no reason to suspect that someone was copying her every gesture, or that her own sister traced her shadow with the precision of an artist studying a masterpiece. Bruna trusted easily, sometimes too easily, and that trust made her vulnerable to dangers she couldn't imagine. She carried her softness like a lantern, unaware that someone was learning to hold the same light, only to use it in the darkest way possible. Carlos continued loving Bruna with the same sincerity that had drawn her to him in the first place. He admired her kindness, her thoughtful nature, the way she made even silence feel meaningful. But he had no idea that the woman he adored was being studied like a blueprint, her entire essence dissected and repurposed. If anyone had told him that another woman, identical in face, but entirely different in soul, was preparing to step into his arms, he would have laughed. He believed life was simple when love was honest. What he didn't know was that honesty was about to become the first casualty of a deception already creeping toward him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night Bianca had been waiting for arrived with a stillness that felt almost symbolic, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Bruna had made weekend plans with a friend, leaving the house warm with her scent, her presence lingering even in her absence. Bianca stepped into her sister's room with a calmness that felt frighteningly natural, picking up Bruna's sweater, tracing her fingers over the familiar fabric. She slipped it on, inhaling deeply, letting the illusion settle like a final layer of armor. In that moment, she no longer felt like a shadow. She felt like the rightful owner of a life she believed fate had denied her. Her heart beat steadily, not with guilt, but with anticipation. She walked to the mirror and practiced Bruna's gentle smile one last time, the one Carlos loved most. The reflection looking back matched her sister perfectly, down to the softness in her eyes that she had learned to counterfeit. This wasn't just imitation anymore, it was transformation. She had rehearsed for this moment so intensely that even her own breathing aligned with Bruna's patterns, and as she shut off the light, she felt a dangerous confidence settle in her chest. Tonight, she told herself, she would finally take something back from the universe. Carlos welcomed her at the door with that familiar warmth, the one that always melted Bruna's heart. But tonight, he wasn't greeting Bruna, he just didn't know it. Bianca stepped inside, matching every movement, every word, every gentle touch Bruna usually offered him. She watched him trust her without hesitation, watched him lean into a closeness she had spent years envying from a distance. And the moment he pulled her close, believing she was the woman he loved, a quiet thrill ran through her. It was the first break in a bond she had been determined to fracture. A break small enough to be invisible, but deep enough to grow into something that would shake all three of their lives in ways none of them were ready for. Bruna had always trusted her memories the way some people trust constellations, fixed, clear, impossible to confuse. But lately, tiny fractures began to appear in that certainty. Carlos mentioned moments they supposedly shared, intimate details she would never forget if they had truly happened, a picnic she had never been on, a conversation she didn't remember having, a perfume she didn't own. Each inconsistency felt like a flicker in her stomach, subtle at first, then more frequent, like quiet alarms she didn't yet know how to interpret. She tried brushing them aside, but there's a heaviness that grows when truth keeps knocking at the door, and that heaviness was starting to settle behind her ribs. Carlos, on the other hand, sensed something he couldn't name. He noticed how Bruna's eyes tightened with confusion when he brought up memories he cherished. He saw the way her smile faltered, the way her breath hitched as she tried to reconcile his words with her own realities. To him, it felt like she was drifting away, like he was losing her even while she was standing right in front of him. He tried not to overthink it, convincing himself it was stress or exhaustion. But deep down, he felt a shift, small, but undeniably there. A shift that made him revisit conversations in his head, wondering why some details suddenly seemed wrong. Bruna's heart grew heavier each day, as if her mind were playing tricks she didn't understand. She found herself staring at her reflection longer than she ever had, searching for answers she couldn't put into words. Something was off, not just with Carlos, but around her, like invisible hands were rearranging the pieces of her life when she wasn't looking. And though she didn't know who or what to blame, she knew one thing for certain: she needed clarity, a truth she could hold on to. So when an unexpected uneasiness tugged at her one evening, telling her to cut her plans short and return home early, she listened without hesitating. She didn't yet realize how that choice would lead her straight into the heart of the betrayal waiting for her. Bruna's footsteps felt unusually loud as she entered her apartment, each tap against the floor echoing through the silence like a warning she didn't yet understand. The familiar scent of her home, coffee, warm linen, a hint of lavender from a candle she often burned, should have comforted her, but tonight it felt tainted, unfamiliar. Her heart thumped in her chest, a nervous drumbeat that made her palms sweat. She moved cautiously, almost as if sensing that something had shifted in the spaces she thought she knew so well. Every instinct in her body screamed that tonight would change everything, even before her eyes confirmed it. Then she saw them. Carlos, the man she loved, and someone wearing her face, tangled in a moment meant only for her. Her heart lurched violently, pain and disbelief crashing together in a storm she had never anticipated. Bianca's eyes glinted with a mix of triumph and wicked satisfaction, as if every moment of planning, every stolen gesture, had led to this exact second. Bruna froze, her mind struggling to catch up with the betrayal before her, while her body felt simultaneously paralyzed and burning with rage. The world seemed to shrink until only the three of them existed, caught in a painful, silent truth that screamed louder than any words could. Carlos looked up, and for a split second, Confusion crossed his face, a shadow of realization. He still hadn't fully comprehended the deception, the double life that had unfolded without his knowledge. Bruna's voice caught in her throat as she fought to form words that could carry the weight of shock, anger, and heartbreak. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt alien, a stage for a performance she had never auditioned for. And in that suffocating silence, Bruna knew the moment she had feared was here, a fracture not just in trust, but in the very foundation of everything she had believed about love, loyalty, and family. The choices she would have to make loomed ahead, and they were anything but easy. Bruna's chest heaved as anger and sorrow collided, each breath a reminder of the trust that had just been shattered. She felt the weight of every stolen moment, every lie, pressing down like a physical force. Tears threatened, but she fought them back, not out of strength, but because the rage inside demanded recognition first. Bianca smirked, bold and unapologetic, as if the pain in her sister's eyes were a prize she had finally earned. Bruna's hands trembled, not just from fury, but from the sudden clarity that some bonds could be broken in ways you never saw coming. Her home, once a haven, felt like a cage, holding her captive with the betrayal she couldn't yet escape. Carlos's voice stumbled as he tried to explain, his hands reaching out as if that simple touch could erase the damage. "I didn't know. I swear," he pleaded, confusion and horror tangled in every syllable. But the words fell flat against the enormity of what Bruna saw with her own eyes. She realized, in that moment, that intent didn't matter. Action had already sealed the fracture. The love she had trusted, the life she had built alongside him, now hung in a precarious balance, waiting for a decision she wasn't ready to make. And while Carlos wrestled with disbelief, she silently vowed that no explanation could undo the storm he had walked into unknowingly. Packing her belongings later that night, Bruna felt a strange mix of liberation and devastation. Every object she touched, every familiar item, now carried the weight of betrayal, a painful reminder of a world she could no longer inhabit safely. Bianca's shadow lingered in her mind, a cruel echo of what had been lost and what could have been, had envy never existed. And as she stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting her face like a cleansing force, she understood one undeniable truth. Some decisions are made in the heart before they ever reach the lips. The path ahead was uncertain, and though the journey would be painful, it was one she had to walk alone, for now. Carlos sat alone in his apartment, replaying every moment with a growing sense of dread. The warmth he had felt with Bruna was now replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a constant ache in his chest he couldn't shake. He kept asking himself the same question over and over. How could he have loved someone so deeply and still been blind to the truth? Every memory he trusted suddenly seemed suspect. Every smile and touch replayed with suspicion. The thought of being deceived, even unknowingly, cut him deeper than he expected, leaving a raw vulnerability he had never felt before. And yet, buried beneath the heartbreak, a resolve began to form. He had to prove the truth, no matter how painful. Determined, Carlos started retracing the days leading up to Bruna's discovery, scouring messages, revisiting places, replaying conversations in his head. Something felt off, but it wasn't until he noticed the perfume, soft, floral, unfamiliar, that a spark of suspicion turned into certainty. A tiny scar on her wrist, invisible at a casual glance, confirmed what he had begun to fear. Comments she made, moments she reacted strangely, all began to form a pattern he could no longer ignore. He realized that the woman in his arms that night hadn't been Bruna. A chill ran down his spine as the truth settled. Deception had walked right into his life, wearing the face of the one he loved most. Every discovery weighed heavily on him, gnawing at his confidence and shaking the foundations of his understanding of love and trust. He wasn't just heartbroken, he was desperate, driven to uncover every detail, to gather undeniable proof. He knew that confronting the situation blindly could shatter everything irreparably. So patience became his weapon. Every small clue, every irregularity mattered now. And as he sat in the dim light of his apartment, piecing together the puzzle, Carlos understood that the journey to reclaiming the truth would test not only his intellect, but his heart. It was a test he couldn't afford to fail. Carlos revisited every memory he shared with Bruna, searching for inconsistencies like a detective combing through evidence. He noticed how she, or rather, Bianca, had responded to questions differently, how certain phrases didn't match the cadence he knew so well. Small details that once seemed trivial now screamed for attention, the way her laughter hit slightly off beat, a hesitation in her words, the way she absent-mindedly twirled her hair. His stomach churned with guilt and confusion, but the more he observed, the clearer it became. He had been deceived, and the realization cut sharper than any betrayal he could have imagined, leaving him shaken yet resolute. Every revelation brought a mixture of sorrow and determination. He replayed texts, reread emails, and even revisited moments in public spaces where he and Bruna had been together, searching for discrepancies. Each discovery was like a puzzle piece falling into place, confirming that the woman he had trusted wasn't who he thought she was. The perfume, the scar, the subtle behavioral changes, they weren't random, they were proof. With each passing hour, his desperation grew, fueled by the fear that without solid evidence, Bruna might never understand what had truly happened. He needed the truth in a way she couldn't ignore. Carlos's mind raced with plans on how to expose the deception without shattering what remained of his connection with Bruna. Confronting Bianca recklessly could backfire, making him appear guilty or untrustworthy. He had to gather undeniable proof, something tangible that could leave no room for doubt. A misplaced hairpin, a fragment of clothing, a recorded confession, anything that could tip the scales back toward clarity. And as he formulated his strategy, a flicker of hope emerged. If he could just show Bruna the truth, perhaps their love, tested and bruised, could survive the storm. But getting there would demand patience, cunning, and a courage he had never had to summon before. Carlos knew he couldn't rush the confrontation. The truth had to be undeniable. He retraced every step Bianca had taken, memorizing her habits, her tone, the subtle mannerisms she tried to mimic. Each tiny slip she had made in her deception became a piece of evidence in his mind, a thread he could pull to unravel the lie. He collected objects left behind, studied her messages, and replayed her conversations in his head until the inconsistencies shone like glaring neon signs. The weight of betrayal pressed on him, but it also sharpened his resolve. He would expose the deception, no matter how long it took, for Bruna's sake and for his own peace of mind. The more he uncovered, the more he understood the depth of Bianca's obsession. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a calculated desire to insert herself into every corner of Bruna's life. Each subtle detail Carlos discovered, the perfume, the small scar, her oddly familiar gestures, felt like pieces of a puzzle forming a picture of someone who had mastered the art of manipulation. He felt a mix of horror and determination. Horror at how deep the betrayal went. Determination to gather enough proof so Bruna could see the truth for herself. Every detail mattered now. A single oversight could undo everything. And yet, despite the heartache and the confusion, Carlos's hope began to flicker. If he could just present the proof carefully, he might reach Bruna's heart again. He imagined her face when the truth was finally revealed, the initial shock giving way to understanding, and perhaps forgiveness. But he also knew that Bruna's decision would be the ultimate test of love, trust, and patience. The path ahead was fragile, and every move had to be precise. He braced himself for what would come next, knowing the confrontation with Bianca and the proof he held would be the turning point, not just for his relationship with Bruna, but for the fate of all three lives entangled in this web of deception. Carlos knew the confrontation had to be precise. One wrong word, one moment of hesitation, and the truth might slip through his fingers. He approached Bianca with calm determination, hiding the storm of emotions raging inside. Every step toward her felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon, where one misstep could shatter the fragile thread of clarity he had spent weeks weaving. Bianca, confident as ever, greeted him with her usual arrogance, unaware that the careful observations and evidence he had collected would soon corner her in ways she hadn't imagined. Carlos's heart pounded, a mix of fear and hope, as he prepared to pull the final pieces into place. Bianca, thinking she had the upper hand, smiled slyly as she noticed his serious expression. She believed that Carlos was there to plead, to negotiate, or maybe even to confess a misunderstanding. But every detail of her plan was about to unravel. Carlos stayed calm, measured, and patient, letting her sense of superiority do the work for him. He let her talk, listened, and nodded, all the while mentally cataloging every slip, every phrase, every tiny clue that would expose her. The room felt taut with tension, each second stretching longer as the moment of truth drew nearer. And in that quiet suspense, the scales were beginning to tip. Finally, as if trapped by her own overconfidence, Bianca let slip a detail only the impersonator would know. It was subtle, almost casual, but to Carlos, it screamed betrayal. He kept his calm demeanor but secretly recorded her words, knowing they would serve as undeniable proof. A hairpin, left carelessly on the table, and a stray message on her phone added weight to the confession she didn't even realize she had made. For the first time, Carlos felt a flicker of relief. The puzzle was nearly complete, and soon Bruna would know the truth. What had been stolen from her and how deeply deception had cut into their lives. But even with the evidence, he knew the hardest part was still ahead: Bruna's decision. Carlos watched Bianca squirm, her confidence cracking under the weight of her own words. Every subtle shift in her posture, every falter in her tone, told him she hadn't expected to be caught. The arrogance that had guided her for so long was melting away, replaced by panic and irritation. Carlos felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. Vindication for exposing the truth, sorrow for the pain this revelation would bring Bruna. He knew that, even with proof, rebuilding trust would be an uphill battle. But right now, the priority was clarity. The veil of deception had to fall completely, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind. Bianca's attempts at denial grew desperate, but every denial only reinforced the evidence Carlos had carefully gathered. A misplaced hairpin on the floor, a subtle gesture she made unconsciously, a recorded snippet of her confession, all converged to form a web of truth that she could no longer escape. Carlos remained composed, letting the pieces speak louder than any argument could. He had to present it all to Bruna with care, knowing that the pain she would feel wasn't from the evidence itself, but from the realization that someone she trusted so completely had betrayed her in such a calculated way. The tension in the room thickened, as if holding its breath for the next moment to arrive. The weight of the confrontation lingered as Carlos prepared to take the proof to Bruna. He imagined her expression when the truth hit, the shock, the anger, and the inevitable heartbreak, but he also pictured the possibility of understanding, perhaps even forgiveness, if she could see that he had been deceived just as completely. It was a delicate balance between hope and fear, trust and heartbreak, and as he stepped away from Bianca, the evidence secured, he felt a renewed determination. He would give Bruna the choice: let her see the truth firsthand and hope that their love, tested and battered, could find a way to survive the storm Bianca had created. Carlos arrived at Bruna's doorstep with his heart in his throat, the evidence clutched tightly in his hands. Every step up the familiar staircase felt heavier than before, weighted with the fear that this might be the moment everything changes, irreversibly. He rang the bell, and when Bruna opened the door, her eyes reflected a mix of surprise and caution, as if sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. He took a deep breath, the words and proof he had prepared lining up in his mind, ready to bring her the truth she deserved. The air between them was thick with anticipation, a fragile tension that could shatter or heal. As he carefully laid out the evidence, the recording, the messages, the hairpin, Bruna's hands trembled slightly. The room seemed to shrink, leaving only the three of them in the space of this revelation: her, Carlos, and the shadow of Bianca's betrayal. She listened intently, her emotions a turbulent sea of shock, anger, sorrow, and a flicker of hope. Each piece of proof weighed on her, but so did the sincerity in Carlos's eyes. For the first time, she began to see the depth of the deception, the meticulous ways Bianca had manipulated their lives. And in that realization, the pain was almost unbearable. Yet clarity began to emerge from the chaos. Bruna now faced the ultimate choice: to trust Carlos and attempt to rebuild the fractured bond, or to walk away forever, carrying the weight of betrayal in her heart. The decision hovered in the room, unspoken but palpable, as if time itself had slowed to let her grasp the enormity of what had transpired. The storm had passed, but the aftermath demanded courage, forgiveness, and understanding, or the finality of loss. And as the two of them stood there, hearts raw and exposed, the story paused at this fragile edge, leaving the outcome suspended, waiting for the step that Bruna would ultimately take.